Hello, everyone, and welcome to Knowing Real Estate with the Pozzi Group. My name is Alan Pozzi. I'll be your host along with my co-host, Art Meister. Art, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Alan. How about you?
Oh, man, I tell you, it's a great day. We're just beginning summer, the buying season, and I think things have picked up a little bit in our local San Antonio market, haven't they?
Yeah, seem to be. People are out. I've done a few open houses over the last few weeks, and people are definitely out. They're looking.
Yep.
They're not excited about some of the things. They're excited about some of the other things. So.
Yeah, but you know what? We're getting both buyers and sellers that are, I think, wanting to do more business, and that's a good thing. You know, I've gotten some listings. You've gotten some new listings, but you know what? I'm getting buyer leads too off my listings, and I think you are too from your open houses, and that's really good, and that's good for the market, and that's good for us as real estate agents. But today I wanted to kind of focus on and talk about. Why is buyer, you know, we've been talking the last couple of weeks about having buyer representation, establishing value as a buyer's agent, and why you should represent the buyer. I think today let's talk about why buyer representation is really important to the seller, because it is. Wouldn't you agree?
I'd agree.
And so I think the first thing we need to talk about, if you're a seller and they're being represented by an agent, you know, one of the things you can count on, that agent is usually going to have their buyer pre-approved or proof of funds or something like that before they submit an offer. Wouldn't you agree, Artie?
Right. I think most of us are looking to conserve time and streamline the process for our buyers, and that would be part of the equation. Is we do have to get them pre-approved.
Absolutely. If you're a seller or a seller's agent, the last thing you want to do, especially if you're the seller's agent, you don't want to hassle with trying to make sure the unrepresented buyer is even capable of buying the house. That's something for the buyer's agent to take care of, I think, and that relieves that burden from you. So
and I think once our sellers understand that there's an element of risk in having people who are not qualified enter their homes, I think we're going to at least open up the conversation and get them to listen to us.
And I think that's the big difference between having a represented buyer and an unrepresented buyer or an unrepresented third party. That's awful hard to do when you're the seller's agent. It's hard for you to represent, even though, you know, intermediary is legal and everything like that. But sometimes it's hard to walk that thin line of representing both sides of the transaction. So when demarcations are clear, one agent has the buyer, another agent has a seller, it makes our life easier, doesn't it?
It really does. It really does.
So what else would the benefit of having a buyer's agent working with a buyer or a represented buyer anyway? Document management and contract guidance. That's important for a buyer, isn't it, Art?
Yeah, I think so. The buyers typically, as well as the sellers, are not all that familiar with our contracts and the obligations and timelines throughout the process.
Absolutely, and I think there's more timelines. If you really look at our contract in the state of Texas and third-party financing addendum and other addenda that are required by the buyer and the seller, for that matter, there's a lot of timelines on the buyer side. You know, getting their loan approved, getting inspections done, negotiating repairs, doing their option period, things like that. So I think it makes life easier for both parties when there's a represented buyer on the other side. Yeah,
I think you're exactly right, and I also think that, you know, the emotional issues that happen through the process for both the buyers and the sellers.
Yep.
You know, those are better managed by a third party, and that would be us as buyer and seller agents.
Both as seller's agent and buyer's agent, you're absolutely right. We're the unbiased third party in the transaction. We're the unemotional party, and we get emotional sometimes.
Right.
But we're supposed to, for the matter of fact, we're the unemotional third party, and we're dealing in facts and black and white, where sometimes buyers and sellers are in that shade of gray and they're confused and they're emotionally attached. So it makes life easier when we take the emotion out of it.
Right.
We also, buyer's agents can also do and provide market analysis for their buyer. How does the buyer even know that they're paying the right price for the home that they're about to buy? Well, the buyer's agent does a market analysis and said, hey, my numbers show this is the correct list price, or maybe it's listed too high, or maybe it's listed too low. Wouldn't you agree?
That's it. And the other factors that go into that may be days on market. Suppose
Absolutely.
the property's been on the market a while. Perhaps it's overpriced. Perhaps there's another reason why it is, and it's up to us as buyers agents to understand what those might be and how we can negotiate that on their behalf.
Absolutely. It goes to one of those points that we have is negotiation support is important. A buyer doesn't know what they can and cannot negotiate without the advice and opinions of their agent. They might try and negotiate something that might not be negotiable, or they might not know that, hey, I can negotiate the option fee, I can negotiate the closing date and things like that they might not understand. Wouldn't you agree with that as well?
Yes, and we see instances like that all the time. I think they've been more prevalent since COVID.
Yep. Absolutely. And then knowing, when to deliver the earnest money and the option money to the title company, knowing how much earnest money and option money to deliver, or maybe that might, even that's negotiable,
Correct.
Rule of thumb is 1% on earnest money, but you know what? Doesn't have to be.
No.
How many homes did you buy? How many homes did you buy where you put $50 and $100 earnest money, Art?
All of them.
Yeah, all of them. Back in the day, a lot of agents don't realize this. When it was truly a buyer's market all over the United States, and especially in South Texas, we didn't see 1% earnest money, did we? We saw $100 or $500 earnest money was a high earnest money check in those days, because people didn't want to put too much out. And you know what? The less they did, the more flexible they became as a buyer. But sellers were kind of left empty-handed too, because if the deal defaulted or terminated, they only got $100 versus maybe $1,000 or $2,000 or $5,000. Like you would nowadays. So buyers are more into it now, but guidance is important for buyers knowing how to put in earnest money.
Well, Alan, this goes back to one of the things you just raised, the importance of a buyer's agent to the seller.
Yeah.
Is the seller's agent will tell the buyer, we really need more earnest money. They don't have enough skin in the game.
Yes.
And they've got it. So now we go back to the buyer's agent and get that changed
exactly
in the contract.
Right. Yep.
So that, again, telling your seller that we need a buyer's agent in there to handle that type of situation, because they'll explain it.
Absolutely.
Versus have the buyer turn and walk away because they didn't want to part with the extra money.
Absolutely. Well, I had a conversation with a potential buyer client a couple of weeks ago. They were wanting to buy about a $500,000 to $600,000 home. They were pre-approved, got their lender had a pre-approval letter, and so they were asking me some questions before we actually started looking at homes. And one of the questions actually I asked them is, do you have enough money in your checking account to write an earnest money check? Or because you want to make sure, hey, they might be pre-approved to buy a $600,000 house, but if they got zero money in their checking account, good luck, right? Because they got a lot of stuff they got to pay for, closing costs, down payment, all that kind of stuff, right? We all know buyers' closing costs, it's quite significant. So they asked me, I go, do you have enough money to put down an earnest money check? And I explained earnest money to them. And they go, yeah, can we just put down $100 or $200? And I said, you can, but they're probably not going to accept your offer on a $550,000 home. We probably need to put somewhere, around $5,000, $5,500 down in order for them to take our offer seriously. Can you do that? And they go, yeah, we have plenty of cash, but they weren't sure. And if they were unrepresented, they would have never known how much to put down or as earnest money. So I think that's some important guidance that we provide as buyers, agents to our buyers. And it helps the seller's agent because they're not dealing with these things.
That's correct.
And they're not giving guidance. Of course, inspection and appraisal access is another important one, isn't it?
Right.
Lining up the inspectors, showing the list of inspectors and arranging it. Then what happens when you get the inspection report? What do you do then?
Well, it depends on which side I'm on.
Well, if you're the buyer's agent.
If I'm the buyer's agent, I get the inspection report. I want to negotiate for every item that's on there.
Well, yeah, you want to look at it, right? Yep.
Yes, but I'll also coach my buyer in terms of these are write-ups that we can live without. They're cosmetic in nature, and typically the buyers don't pay for that.
Absolutely.
So the cosmetic items we separate out, and we start dealing with the mechanicals, the plumbing, the air conditioning, the roof, those types of things that are major
electrical
expenses.
things like that.
The electrical. Yep. So we focus on that, and that's an advantage again to the seller, that the buyer's rep would go after those particular items and explain to the buyer, and hopefully many of you do have this conversation with your buyers.
Absolutely.
That you take the items that are
concerning to your buyer or whatever,
concern to the buyer, and we negotiate for those. But the cosmetic repairs the cosmetic things you take out of that.
Yep.
And you may end up getting bids for them so that they feel more comfortable in the expense that they're likely to lay out.
Absolutely. And also, one of the things I think that also has to be considered is the competition. If there's 3 offers on that home and you ask for the seller to do $10,000 in repairs, that might be the smartest request, considering the fact this might be a multiple offer situation. We're not getting as many multiple offers like we used to, but we're still getting some.
Yes.
And I think that's where the buyer's agent comes in and is, because they've communicated with the listing agent. They say, hey, do you have anything else working? The listing agent says, well, we got 2 other offers. Now you're in a multiple offer situation, so you're going to help your clients negotiate the best deal and win. That's
right.
The important part, right? They got to buy a house.
And as a responsibility to your seller, you also would prefer to have the buyer that's most interested in buying your home.
Absolutely.
Because there may be, in that situation, there may be two of the potential buyers that may have put in other offers, which we find on other homes. Absolutely.
So we've got to be smart about that. And also we have sometimes buyers are really sellers in waiting. They want to buy a home and they come to you, the listing agent, and say, hey, I want to buy this home. Well, great. But then the buyer's agent or the listing agent may find out, and then maybe they do things differently, that buyer really needs to sell a home before they can buy a home.
Right. And what if the buyer doesn't understand how to put a contingency together?
Exactly, a contingent offer.
What if they let the offer go, knowing that there's a contingency there? Your seller's not going to be very happy with you as the listing agent. They're
For the buyer.
They're not going to be happy with anybody. Yep. because there's no independent third party that you could coach them through this process so that it gets done right and the contingent offer is submitted correctly.
And that goes to my next point, and we kind of teed it up here, Art, so thank you. But it goes to all the addenda that are included in a contract, right? Buyers have a third party. If they're borrowing money, they got third-party financing addendum. If they got a mandatory HOA, they got the mandatory HOA addendum. If there's home was built prior to 1978, we got a lead-based paint. We got a lot of other addenda that are just part of an offer, and we got to know which addenda to submit so that the buyer has a completed offer. Because one thing I learned, and you probably learned it as well, is you only got one chance as a buyer's agent and as a buyer to get it right. And if you get it wrong, you're probably going to lose the deal.
Right.
If it's not a complete offer.
I think one thing I could add to the list that you just mentioned was that pre-approval letter, too.
Absolutely, getting a lender pre-approval.
And perhaps speaking to the lender once you receive the offer as a listing agent.
Yep.
Then speak to the lender and make sure that everything's lined up properly and you're ready to go.
Well, that's another important part you brought up, Art, about speaking to the lender. The conversation that most buyers agents should have with any lender is, how soon can we close before they submit an offer? Because when you submit an offer, you got to have a closing date on it.
Right.
And, the lender may tell you, Alan, hey, these guys are good to go. We can close this deal in 21 days. Then you submit an offer with maybe a 22 or 23-day closing. But another lender may say, you know what, Alan, I work with these people. I'm asking them for documents. I haven't gotten their last 2-year tax returns and their paycheck stubs. We need a 45 or a 60-day closing. But that lender guidance is so important. So you brought up a really good point, and I think that's something also I think if you had an unrepresented buyer, we would have a difficult time dealing with if we were a seller's agent.
That's correct. The one thing we don't want to do as listing agents and seller's agents is we don't want to let them down any more than the buyer's agent wants to let their client down.
Yep. So, and that always leads to on-time closings too.
Yes.
And that's an important part.
Everybody enjoys that.
Absolutely, and we're all in this together. So when the buyer's agent comes in and submits a closing date, and the seller agrees to that closing date, we're all working towards the buyer and their agent, and the seller and their agent are all working towards that closing date and getting done things on time. And that makes us all happy because that's when we get paid.
Everybody gets paid on that day.
That's right. That's when we
Everybody
get
gets paid on that day.
And that's a great day because, Art and I have a habit of driving around the title company till they call us and tell us it's funded so we can go get our checks.
I don't think it's quite that bad at this stage in our careers.
Not quite that bad, but it has been. Anyway, but I think in kind of wrapping things up here and kind of closing out, overall, if you're a seller, And you're dealing with, if you're the seller and the seller's agent, dealing with a represented buyer is really the way to go, because it's just buyer management. There's going to be a lot of peaks and valleys in the transaction. You know that, and the people out there know that. And it's great to have that buyer's agent represent the buyer and walk them through all the transaction process, and let them worry about the buyer and their peaks and valleys.
Agreed. I think probably the most difficult area and where we can provide the most value is managing that emotion through the transaction.
Exactly, and there's going to be emotional peaks and valleys throughout there as well as transaction peaks and valleys, and that's what we do, and that's why we earn our money as buyers agents.
That's right. So when our buyers schedule the moving truck to be there on closing day, we can have a conversation with them that may not be the best idea.
Yeah, right, because it might not fund until the following day.
and how many times? Hopefully not very many, but I think all of us who've been in the business a while have had a moving truck sitting outside and a home that isn't funded.
Yep, and that's right, and but that's part of the buyer's agent. The buyer's agent is able to educate their client and earn that value. We've talked about this in the past when we've talked about buyer agency, but I think it's so important, and that also helps the seller sleep a little bit better at night, and the seller's agent knowing that the buyer's agent's on top of their game.
You bet.
And those are the kind of agents we like to deal with when we're representing sellers. And as a buyer's agent, we like representing we like communicating with the seller's agent and letting them know we have our act together.
That's correct.
That helps your client as well. So with that said, Art, why don't you take us out of here and let's wrap it up.
Well, I'd like to encourage you to subscribe, like this podcast right down below.
Right down below.
And remember, who you work with matters.
Absolutely. Art, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot out there, guys. We'll see you next time.
Bye for now.